Thank you guys so much for tuning back into my Seeing Through Gebser series. This is the mythical structure. We are working our way through. We're on page 61 of this edition of the Ever-Present Origin. I believe it's the most popular on Amazon. And we're excited. I apologize. I want to make a disclaimer. I apologize for the maybe not the best audio. Unfortunately, I can't justify spending hundreds of dollars on a microphone right now. I have a pregnant girlfriend. I have to save as much as I can because I don't know what's coming after the baby is born. So I have a feeling that there's going to be bills popping up that I can't take into account right now. So I'm just kind of saving for that. And I apologize for that. And I appreciate you guys watching because I'm a Marylander. And us Marylanders, we're having a rough day today. All right. We're having a rough weekend. Mark Andrews is out here crushing my dreams, ripping my heart out, and just spitting on it. I had the worst of both worlds. We lost the game, and I can't even propagate my anti-Lamar choke narrative. Um, and it's 6 degrees outside, and it's beyond freezing. I don't even want to take my trash off. So thank you. I appreciate you guys tuning in. So we're getting into the mythical consciousness structure. I was going to make a disclaimer about the time of this video, but I do that in all my videos, and I always say this is only going to take 20 minutes, and that's all it's going to take. And then an hour later, you're still staring at this ugly face. So we're just going to get right into it. Now, we're on page 61. Page 61. We are in the mythical consciousness structure. Very important. I'm going to preface this. Remember, if you have not seen the magical structure video, you must go watch it. If you just stumbled upon this, I don't know how. One, I feel sorry for you. Two, if you want to learn what I'm saying, go back. I'm sorry. You have to go back and listen to my other videos because I can't afford to recap everything or else these videos are going to be 3 hours long. But there is one point that's very important to keep in mind. Remember when I talked about in the magic consciousness structure, the separation, the wanting to separate yourselves from the unified world that emanates magical forces, and you are directing your own forces back against nature, and you are trying to separate because you're tired of being a slave to the magical forces of the world. It might sound silly out of context, but it makes more sense once you understand in context. So that's big. So the magic structure conception of the world, think of it like an atom. An atom is a very, 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 very small unit. But according to the scientists with the Big Bang, the atom split or the atom burst open and it contained the entirety of the world that we see today. So that's sort of how they viewed the world. It was this large, it was a lot of events, a lot of parts that were interconnected by a overarching invisible whole in a sense. Everything was vast and dreamlike and difficult to understand. Nonetheless, everything was unified and connected. And in the rituals and in the will to power, they separate themselves. This is the origin of all rituals, the will to power, the political drive, the drive to be against someone just for the sake of it, because being against someone draws separation. And that separation is exactly what the mythical consciousness structure will pick up on. It's no longer just one dimensional or one point with a bunch of lines connecting it. That's not what it is. It's something else entirely. Now, it's important to know that the magic structure was completely timeless and spaceless. It's very, 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 very difficult to wrap your mind around now, especially rationally. It just won't make sense. You just have to understand that there was simply no conception of time. Time itself is a mental conception, but we'll get to that. But they just did not think in terms of yesterday, tomorrow, today, a year from now. They just didn't. I don't know. It almost feels like a giant simulation. Or think of it when I was in my car the other day and I was listening to the new Geese album or the most recent one, and I was super into it. And I was, I was excited. I was singing the songs and I felt spaceless and timeless. I felt like I had no conception of time. I was lost in time. That's sort of what it feels like. Now let's get into it. So because of that, I should say, because there's no conception of time, it's very difficult to pinpoint exactly when the magical consciousness structure started. There's no conception of time, and the way they viewed the world wasn't conducive towards recording things. It's just how it was. So he said, we can, however, locate approximately the time of the mutation from the magic to the mythical structure, since a consciousness of time, however rudimentary, would have had to manifest itself before the mutation was possible. In accord with the magic structure, this would have been more a sense of time than a knowledge of it, a time sense closely attuned to nature. Here we would note that whereas the distinguishing characteristic of the magic structure was the emergent awareness of nature, the essential characteristic of the mythical structure is the emergent awareness of the soul. We will get to that. Magic man's sleep-like consciousness of natural time is the precondition for mythical man's coming to awareness of soul. Wherever we encounter seasonal rituals in the later periods of the magic structure, and particularly in astronomical deliberations in various forms of the calendar, as for example among the Babylonians and later in Egyptian and Mexican civilization, we find anticipations of the mythical structure. Such forms of evidence indicate that the coming to awareness of nature has reached its conclusion. A process whereby the rhythm of nature, with its conspicuous auditory emphasis becomes, in a purely natural way, temporal. This is the decisive step taken by Magic Man out of his interlacing with nature. As he just said, the magical consciousness structure was birthed from the discovery of nature, separate from the whole or the world. That is what, remember, the ear was invoked to understand nature. That's the new discovery. Our consciousness has went up a level in complexity, and now we've discovered nature. That's what captivates us, and that's what drives the magical consciousness structure. The mythical consciousness structure is based off the discovery of the internal. Remember, nature is external. We're now focused outward, externally. The soul, if you insist on using rationalist terms, the psyche is internal. There's a breathing aspect that Gebser talks about later on where it sort of switches from external to internal. Excuse me, I just ate. And we'll pick up on that later. But that is the key point. All of these consciousness structures, besides perhaps the archaic, was birthed from the discovery of something. Magic its nature, myth it's the soul, mental it's space, integral it's time, space-time. So that is very, very, very important. Now he goes on to talk about some of the imagery from around this time. Oh, and it should be said, the time period from when this starts is about 10,000 BC. Now, what else happens here? So this is exactly Joseph Campbell's way of the seeded earth. This is when we sit down, sapiens, you all know Harari talks about this, is the agricultural revolution around 10,000 BC, when we domesticated wheat, or at least he argues the wheat domesticated us. We no longer went from hunter-gatherer foragers, berry pickers. Now we've sat down. That's all of tribes. There's no civilization. There's no society there. Now we're sitting down. We're trying to build a town. We're trying to build civilization. We're trying to farm instead of just hunting and gathering. And in doing so, this will lay the foundations for a wider, progressively more populated civilization and society to emerge. It's a big, big, big shift here. And the big shift, there is a cause, if you want to think of it that way. That's the mythical consciousness structure. There's a fundamental change. So Harari noticed it, and I'm not the biggest fan of his. Campbell noticed it. Gebser noticed it. And I think William Irwin Thompson noticed it too. There's a change in myth. There's a change in viewing the world with the mythical consciousness structure. There's a change in the way we eat, just something basic, food. I mean, food is an undeniable necessity, and now we're changing, so I think that's a big deal. And he goes through a lot of the imagery in the books. I won't lie to you. I could read it out for you, but in doing so, I would just sort of be regurgitating. I don't really have that much of an understanding. It is interesting, but my ability to analyze art in the way that Gebser does is just not there. Not yet, at least. So I'm going to skip over that, but if you're interested, maybe leave a comment. Now, he says, quote, the very original, and he kind of switches around. He talks about the pictorial representations of man's emergent awareness of his enmeshment in nature as the magic structure into the mythical conscious structure. There's all these changes. He talks about religion too. He says the very original meaning of the word religion from religere indicates this. It means careful observance and is the opposite of negligence, i.e., careless non-observance. Since we will later deal with the Christian interpretation of the word religion in the sense of tie back, constrain, we would only mention here that within a world that paid meticulous attention to language, which was in consequence unusually nuanced, nothing could have been arbitrary. This is also true of pictorial expressions, to which the mythical world was even more closely tied, since imagery is the prominent mode of the soul's manifestation. the way the soul, exactly what he said, the way the soul manifests itself in the mythical consciousness structure is through imagery, imagination, the image. And it might seem like when we go back and analyze history that these guys are irrational morons. That's just simply not, I mean, they are to an extent, yeah, sure, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't purpose behind what they did. Everything, as he just said, everything had purpose, even if it was symbolic, even if you wanted to write it as irrational, that's fine. This idea that the rationalists have, that everyone before them is just an idiot who doesn't know anything, we'll get to them. So you have to understand that nothing is arbitrary, and when analyzing imagery or myths, you must pay fine attention to the details. There is nothing in this that is just haphazardly thrown together, like all the rationalists will try to tell you it have. All right, now we go to quote 3. This, my friend, is my favorite quote. Now, he goes through a lot of the myths themselves, and he goes to the imagery, like I said. I'm not going to get into that. So this is very, 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 very important because he's about to explain what myth is, and he's about to explain how myth itself is a manifestation of the new consciousness structure. Rationalists, pay attention. Quote, the corresponding verb for mythos is, I apologize, the pronunciations are going to be absolutely terrible. I apologize. Quote, the corresponding verb for mythos is mythiome, meaning to discourse, talk, speak. Its root mu means to sound. But another verb of the same root, mein, ambivalent because of the substitution of a short u, means to close, specifically to close the eyes, the mouth, and wombs. From this root we have Sanskrit mucus or mucus with long vowel, meaning mute, silent, and Latin mutus, with the same meaning. It recurs in Greek in the word mystis, or mystes, the consecrated, and mysterium, and later during the Christian era gave the characteristic stamp to the concept of mysticism, speechless contemplation with closed eyes, that is, eyes turned inward. Then he goes on to say, yet we must not make the error of deciding in favor of the one or the other of these two basic meanings. Only from a rational standpoint are they contradictory. So, on one hand, like he said, so myth derives from mythos. And well, I'll actually explain this later on when we get to the digression on primordial root words. One of the problems with rationalism is it assigns only one exclusive definition to a word or symbol and then pretends everything else just doesn't exist because A must be A and not A and B at the same time. Well, that's nice under rational considerations, but guess what? We haven't gotten there yet. We're in the mythical consciousness structure, so we have to understand it on its own terms. So when you would investigate the root of this word, get what Gebser is saying here, there seems to be a contradiction in the sense that on one hand, the root of this word means silent internal reflection. Emphasis on the word silent. That's the operative word. We are silently, internally reflecting. On the other hand, it simultaneously holds the exact opposite meaning of speaking, making audible, creating a form into the world. Operative word, speaking and audible. So we have silence on one hand and audible sound on the other, both deriving from the exact same root word. Rationalists are probably having a heart attack right now. They say, no, this is a contradiction. You cannot have one word expressing two antithetical concepts at the same time. No, fuckers. You are the ones with the problem, not these guys. You are the ones who are trying to bastardize history by viewing all of it exclusively through your terrible, deficient lens. I will not play your game. So, how does the mythical man reconcile this? He doesn't. From an elementary standpoint, this apparent contradictoriness is more than that, for both meanings are valid. It is not enough if we admit only the aspect of silence, like the traditionalists who recognize only the esoteric tradition. They are obliged to do so, given their orientation to the past. Nor is it sufficient to emphasize only the speaking, like the evolutionists who recognize only the exoteric, progress orientation. Their forward-looking orientation obliges them to emphasize the spoken word. Only when we acknowledge both meanings of the root can we discern the fundamental nature of the mythical structure. Only when taken together as an elemental ambivalence and not a rational contradiction are they constitutive for the mythical structure. When speaking of constitutive, it is necessary to choose a more appropriate word, one which expresses the stronger field of tension than the term ambivalence. We are entitled here to speak of the polar nature of the word myth, polar, not dualistic, whose primal verbal structure gives the mythical structure its effective stamp. Just as the archaic structure was an expression of zero-dimensional identity and original wholeness, remember the atom, and the magic structure an expression of one-dimensional unity in men's merging with nature, so is this mythical structure the expression of two-dimensional polarity, yin, yang, complement, correspond to one another. Picture the yin-yang, you've got it. While the archaic structure led to the unity of the magic structure by a loss of wholeness and identity, providing a gradually increasing awareness of man's individuation, the liberating struggle against nature in the magic structure brought about a disengagement from nature and an awareness of the external world. The mythical structure, in turn, leads to the emergent awareness of the internal world of the soul. Its symbol is the circle, the age-old symbol for the soul. The individual point of the magic structure is expanded into an encompassing ring on a two-dimensional surface. It encompasses, balances, and ties together all polarities as the year, in the course of its perpetual polar cycle of summer and winter, turns back on itself. As the course of the sun encloses midday and midnight, daylight and darkness, as the orbit of the planets, in their rising and setting, encompasses visible as well as the invisible paths and returns onto itself. Now, very important. 2D flat circle. Look at this perfect circle I just drew. Choose the binaries that winter, summer, daylight, darkness. This is what they do. They fold onto each other. If you were to rationally reconcile them, you would miss the entire point. There is nothing to be reconciled. They are complementary and correspond to one another. Do not rationally reconcile them by denuding them of both their contradictory meanings and assigning them only one. These are two halves of a constitutive whole that turn in and on. They turn in itself. They complement to each other and correspond to one another. There is no rational reconciling here. There is no A is A and not A and B at the same time. No, A is A and Z at the same time. And if you try to take it any other way, you're missing the point. You're not going to understand it on its own terms. And if you're not understanding it on its own terms, not only are you not understanding history on its own terms, you're not understanding yourself on its own terms. Because the same binaries, or polarities, I guess if you want to call them, that the mental consciousness structure would go on to also posit, they now invoke the third aspect of measuring thought to rationally reconcile them or to privilege one or the other. That can be nice and that can be good, but the fact of the matter is, I take the view of good and evil. These don't need to be rationally reconciled at all. These are two halves of a source, two halves of a whole that spring from the same source. That source being life. Now, whether you want to attribute that to God or evolution, I don't really care. The fact of the matter is they've been here the whole time, and I don't have to sit here and play this postmodern rationalist game of, oh, well, what is good and what is evil? Ooh, and they're not the same, and they're antithetical, and evil is bad, and good is good, so we're going to try to... No, you're missing it. You're missing it. You have no balance. You have no psychological unity. All you're trying to do is divide. And what happens is your psyche worms its way back in there, and you think you're being super rational and super logical. In reality, you're being just as emotional and just as psychologically biased as all the irrational mythical people that you guys like to deride. If you haven't noticed, I will be intersplicing this video with rants against rationalists. Kill rationalism, all right? I just wrote a Substack about that. Kill rationalism. In the natural temporal rhythm of the circle, we again encounter the affinity of time with the soul. Moreover, if the magic structure quote unquote results in the emerging awareness of Earth's natural cycles, then the mythical may be said to establish an awareness of Earth's counterpole, the sun in the sky. And this Earth, having been acquired via the magic struggle, is encompassed, as it were, by both polar psychic realities, by the subterrestrial Hades and the subterrestrial Olympus. So again, heaven and hell, good and evil, darkness and light. These are the polarities that show the fabric of the world. This is what the world was made out of, these polarities that circle in and out on each other. There really is no summer and winter separate from one another because they both necessitate each other and fall back in on one another. This is probably a good point to bring up time. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because we will be addressing this more in more detail later on in the book. But time is a mental conception. And of course, being a mental conception, it is a product of the mental consciousness structure. And the divisiveness, the division inherent in the mental rational thought is also inherent in time. Of course, time is a divider, a partitioner, and a severer. What is it partition? Well, it's 4:27 p.m. now. It's not 4:28. It's not 4:26. It's not 5 o'clock. It's not 1 o'clock. It is 4:27. If I would had a normal schedule, I'd be eating in 30 minutes. There is time divides. It says it divides um, what is being considered temporally into these little time units that are separate from one another. So that's how it partitions. And what does it sever then? It severs the old image, imagination, mythical image of the world, of the polarity of the 2D flat circle that closes in on itself and constantly has this perpetual coming and going. That was the natural temporicity from 10,000 BC up until about the Renaissance. That was the sort of way time was understood, just a kind of perpetual coming and going. There wasn't a strong sense of mental time. It's not what it was. All right. Oh, and this is another point. Um, he makes a point about architecture too. Now he mentioned this point about architecture in the beginning. Um, that wasn't not the three worlds, the one before that. I don't know. It was the first video I did. I can't remember if I mentioned, but he talked about the phallic column architecture and the uterine cave architecture. And of course, the phallic stands for penis, and then the uterine stands for vagina. Sometimes in modern day, we read these old books and we're a little confused as to why these aspects of our sex are so important. He's about to explain why. The two fundamental architectonic forms in antiquity, however, whose origin we have traced above in rationalistic terms to an analogy with the uterus and the phallus, have deeper roots than in a mere superimposition of basic anatomical structures onto architecture. There is, moreover, a distinct sense of duality evident in the perpendicular arrangement of these basic forms, and every dualistic conception is a sign of a rational attitude. Thus even architecture reflects mythical man's polar conception. The cavern sanctuaries, such as those of Trophonius in Boeotia, are the complement of early Greek columnar temples and prefigure the transformation of the cavern. That's why it was so important. Male and female, the genitals that we use to create life, which of course pre-scientifically was filled with spiritual, mythical, godly meaning, and you weren't just a biological, you weren't a rationalist conception of what a human being is, a mere monkey who after millions of years just happened to evolve and everything's just atoms in the void, and when we die we're going to die, so nothing really matters. That's bullshit. It's more than that. It was the fabric of the world. It was the way in which objects in the world were brought into relation with each other. Posit one thing that is polar, which creates its opposite. Polar, not dualistic, polar, these two um, close in on each other. And of course, that would include male and female. And the male and females are the ones who bring you into this world, into this existence. And of course, back in the religious days, back in the mythological days, that had a whole lot more meaning than our terrible rationalists. You're just an animal with no spirituality involved. And if you even bring that up, we're going to deride you and mock you and cast you out of society because I'm a rationalist and I got everything figured out. Okay. Now here's another thing. This will explain more clearly again the reconciling of the contradiction. Myth is the closing of mouth and eyes. Since it is a silent, inward-directed contemplation, it renders the soul visible so that it may be visualized, represented, heard, and made audible. We're going to go through that again. It's the closing of mouth and eyes. So if I'm telling a myth or if I'm telling a story, I cannot tell the external realization of the story when I put it either to words or to paper. That is only one half of the whole. The other half comes in after I have silently zipped my lips and reflected. You can't just there must necessarily be some preceding internalized thought or reflection that then causes the externalization of what has been considered. So when I watch The Godfather, Mario Puzo or Francis Ford Coppola didn't just be possessed by instinct and vital emotions, and they just sort of automatically, uh, I'll make him an offer he can't refuse. Sonny got hit. All this stuff. That's not what it worked. Take the gun, leave the cannoli. He silently, internally reflected, and then after coming to whatever decision he made, he said, here's a good line. Leave the gun, take the cannoli. He said, I've got it. But he did that silently in here. Then he externalizes it outwards, pen to paper, put it in the actor's mouth. Now we got one of my favorite movies of all time. So that's very important. There's nothing to contradict here. Myth is the representing and making audible, the articulation, the announcement, the report of what has been seen and heard. So myth is both silently reflecting to see and hear. It is also putting to actualization what has been seen in the moment of reflection. What in one instance is a mute image is, in another, a sounding word. What is viewed inwardly as in dream has its conscious emergence and polar complement in poetically shaped utterance. Thus the word is always a mirror of inner silence, and myth a reflector of the soul. This is one of my favorite Gebser lines coming up. He says, the blind or unreflective side of the mirror is necessary to produce the visible reflection. I almost might call my YouTube channel that, the blind mirror or something like that. Since all psychic phenomena have an essentially reflective character, they not only evidence natural temporality, as opposed to time, but also make reference to the sky. The soul reflects the sky, as well as hell. Thus the circle is complete. Time, soul, myth, hell, and heaven, myth, soul, time. Everything completes itself. Let's see. Okay. Now, then, after a paragraph, he says, the mythical structure is distinct from the magic in that it bears the stamp of the imagination rather than the stress of emotion. That's what I'm talking about. Instincts, emotions, and the vital urges fueled the magic man up until 10,000 BC. Discovery of the soul, now how it's manifesting is imagery. So when you're fantasizing, when I was 11 years old and I would fantasize about being some cool hitman or something, or scoring the game-winning goal in a World Cup, that's mythical consciousness structure. That's what that is. That's not rational, logical nonsense. And I had a lot of fun doing that when I was a kid. A lot of kids do that. I want to be Spider-Man. My nephews, they want to be Spider-Man. They pretend to be Spider-Man. That's mythical consciousness structure. Movies, by the way, when I go and watch, what did I watch last night? In the Name of the Father. One, it's a story, which is just a reduced version of a myth. Two, it's imagistic, which means it is fundamentally mythical in nature. So that's what's activating. That's what's being activated when you watch a really great movie. The mythical consciousness structure. You're not going to a movie so you can do 2 + 2 = 4, or 48 × 17 is 816. That's not what you're doing. In the magic structure, the vital connections reach awareness and are manifested in emotional forms, in actions dominated by impulse and instinct and subordinate to the demands and ramifications of spontaneous, affective reactions such as sympathy and Jesus Christ. Antipathy, my goodness. This is what Robert Greene talked about in his Laws of Human Nature. The tribal emotional interactions is what sort of caused things. The group, however the group was, that's what caused actions, empathy and sympathy and all that stuff. We have already spoken of the pre-perspectival nature of the one-dimensional magic structure. It is spaceless and timeless and has an emotional and instinctual consciousness responsive to the demands of nature and earth. That's where all our aggression comes from. We needed that, or else we wouldn't be here. The mythical structure, however, whose unperspectival two-dimensionality has a latent predisposition to perspectivity, has an imaginatory consciousness reflected in the imagistic nature of myth and responsive to the soul and sky of the ancient cosmos. Although still distant from space, the mythical structure is already on the verge of time. And then, let's see. And there you go. Okay, here we go. Continuing on. There is a breakthrough of this polarity even in the mythical utterance. The spoken words in themselves are not decisive. This holds true in myth as in any other utterance. They become decisive only when understood in conjunction with what was left unsaid. Huge point. Only when the unspoken communicates its silent messages does the spoken word convey the depth and polarity that constitute the tension of real life. Silence by itself is a magical spell, and speech by itself mere rational babble. The word has value, apart from magical power or rational formula, only where the speaker takes its interdependence into account. The attentive listener will discern the affinity, perhaps not demonstrable, between word and value. In a certain sense, myths are the collective dreams of the nations formed into words. Until expressed in poetic form, they remain unconscious processes. Their mere utterance is an indication only of their latent possibility for consciousness, not of consciousness itself. Every emergence of consciousness presupposes the externalization of something that presses or is pressed towards awareness. Remember, the soul, nature, space, space-time. Consequently, the emergence of consciousness always has a reiterative and retractive function and depends above all on a certain formative and shaping power. In the formed myth, consciousness reveals the soul and, at the same time, an invisible and extended region of nature, the cosmos. It reveals everything that has materialized and is now manifest in the imagery of psychic processes as myth, coming to awareness in consequence of its emergent form. So that can be kind of confusing. Number one, myth is the putting to form of what has been seen when reflecting on the soul. That's what he's talking about. All these consciousness structures assign a certain form to whatever it is they're considering. So in the Magic Man, it's nature. Now we understand nature. It's a series of parts. It's a unified whole that manifests in a series of parts that are interconnected and emanate magical forces. Then, of course, in the mythical, now we've discovered the soul. We've um, render transparent the internal, at least to an extent. And now we are assigning a sort of form to it by myth. And that's what it does. And of course, the mental conscious structure would assign a certain logical, rational form to not necessarily nature, but an objectified spatial world. There's a difference. Let's see. Disregarding the pure cosmogonies, we see that all previous interpretations of myth are predicated mainly on the two predominantly contextual aspects of myth. Actually, I shouldn't have read that. That's right. Whatever aspect is emphasized, the interpretation of myth always brings about an illumination of life. The illumination of life coming from myth interpretation is closely akin to the successful dream interpretation of modern depth psychology. So why myth is so important is because its function is to illuminate life after doing exactly that, reflecting inward. So you will have a new idea of your soul, your psyche, your character, who you are. It will be illuminated, for better or worse. But also the world, in turn, will take on a new light, a new tinge to it. You will have a new understanding of the world. It is an illuminating aspect. This is the point of myth. We'll get to my criticisms at the end. And I want to circle back to that one point that was very important. When he said words become decisive only when understood in conjunction with what was left unsaid. This is another key point, especially when you're analyzing, like, say, the Bible or any sort of those kind of books from back in the day. You have to check the dates because that will give you a clue as to what consciousness structure is dominating the person who wrote it. For example, he goes on later in the book to say, take the statement, war is the father of the world. That's just a simple statement, okay? If someone in that time, in say 9800 BC, were to say something like that, the person who listened and who heard that statement would have understood that the corresponding complementary phrase that goes along with the original phrase. So we have war is the father of the world, and then the mythical man, even if this was left unsaid, understands that, yes, that is true, but peace is the mother of the world. So when you see these sort of singular claims in this, you have to understand the polar complement and corresponding claim also existed, and everyone understood it, even if no one verbally or, I guess, in a written manner acknowledged that. That's very, 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 very important. So you have to understand these things. When they say something like war is the father of the world, what they're doing is they're trying to emphasize a particular aspect of the whole. But it's not a problem because the people there already understood, hey, I'm taking the part and I'm connecting it to that polar 2D flat circle that corresponds and complements to each other. Let's see. Now we're back to the illumination of life. The illumination of life coming from myth interpretation is closely akin to the successful dream interpretation of modern depth psychology. So there you go. The same dream interpretation. I tried to do that. That can offer you really profound insights. Same thing with myth interpretation. This is why people who walk around and say, oh, why do we need myths? They're just fairy tales. Our emphasis, however, is on the illumination and not the life as the essential moment of the mythical process. For whether myth is interpreted from an astral standpoint, that is, with particular reference to cosmology, or from a vital, that is, a basic anthropological standpoint, very nearly all myths contain an element of consciousness emergence to the extent that they reflect the emergent awareness of the soul. Myth was based on the discovery of the soul. That's what it's trying to do. It is the shaping and crafting of images to touch aspects of the soul, which will then carry the spirit forward. I will return to that at the end when I get to my critiques of rationalism. Oh, this is cool. So we're going to go through a little example. I don't want to go too much. He goes through a few, but this is fun. He says, there is, for example, the 17th rune of the Kalevala, wherein the great bard Wainamoinen, my God, must find the meaning of several words before he is able to complete his boat. Only after he has learned the words from the primal giant Whippinen, only after finding expressions for all primordial phenomena, which is equivalent to a process of realization, i.e. consciousness emergence, can he complete his boat and embark on the voyage described in the 18th rune. Having traversed his own soul, symboled by the voyage, which we understood as symbolic of emergent consciousness, mythical man finds the other person, the partner specifically intended for him. The awakening toward the self proceeds circuitously through the awakening toward the thou, and in the thou the entire world opens up, a previously egoless world of total merging. Only someone who has learned to say I to himself, a self no longer dispersed over or withdrawn from the world, is capable of losing himself and regaining himself in another person. And the mystery of this gain, which is at the same time a loss, is perhaps life's most inscrutable secret, profound and fathomless at sea. Having withstood the voyage, Wainamoinen finds Aniki, on the opposite shore, as Theseus, after crossing the Aegean, finds Ariadne of Crete in the very palace where the prince with the crown of feathers was excavated. After a long voyage, the Greeks regain Helen and Troy, and surviving his shipwreck, Odysseus encounters Nausicaa. Gunther finds Brunhild, queen across the sea, and Tristan, having braved many storms at sea, discovering Isolde and himself, for every voyage is a discovery of self. The motif of the sea voyage is found in all cultural traditions, Nordic, Greek, and Germanic. So the sea, when you're reading these old myths, the sea represents the soul or the unconscious. So what happened was, it said, only after he has learned the words from the primal giant Whippinen, only after finding expressions for all primordial phenomena. So what does that mean? Only after separating himself from the exclusive realm of the magic consciousness structure and understanding the new consciousness structure, the new polar 2D flat circle that corresponds to complements each other and corresponds to each other with the poles. Then, now that he has the new weapons, he can cross the sea, take the voyage with the new consciousness understanding, traverse the soul, and come out on the other side improved. I thought that was pretty interesting. Now, let's see. Okay, now we're going to skip ahead a little bit here. That's what he says. He says, whatever form, sun or water, stone or air, the soul and life are the bond between these polarities. In the mythical accounts, now the one, now the other aspects predominates, revealing in each instance its unspoken polar complement of the invisible reverse surface of the mirror. And the emergence of consciousness which affects its presence in these myths remind us that not just the sun, but also darkness within man is thereby rendered visible. That's what I was saying earlier. Good and evil, light, darkness. Everything is understood to be flowing through this circle, this 2D flat circle. Let's see, do I want to read this? And there was one point where he said, the reality of mythical dream, however, was so vivid as to be almost identical with what we call today reality. Myth was the polar complement of life, dream the polar complement of waking consciousness. It is via the polarity that mythical man As he becomes aware of dream and myth, comes to an awareness of consciousness. Standing in the circle, he courses through the cycle of dream and wakefulness, cycle of awakening. That's another thing. That's why dreams were so important. Everything was polarly complemented and correspond to one another. So when we have the real world, a waking consciousness, real life, well, that generates its polar complement, which is waking. And if these are two halves of a whole, the dream world was just as important as real world. So that's why dreams had a more profound effect on civilizations and individuals, because they weren't just seen as dreams. Now, of course, nowadays we rationalize those away as just neurons firing or just nonsense that we can't really engage with. We'll get there. But that was really important. I'm trying to show you how everything's work. It's kind of difficult to understand from a rational perspective, because a rational person would say, no, no, wait, dreams are not the same as reality. They are different. They are distinct. And we're going to privilege one of these two by invoking the third act of measuring thought. In this case, they obviously privilege real life, conscious, physical life. Not so for the mythical man. Now, again, you can say that's stupid. You can say it's dumb all you want. I think you're dumb for going back in history and trying to pretend that everyone's a little rational robot. So, Gebser is offering you the key to understanding history on its own terms. Please take it. Okay, now we're going to get the last few paragraphs and then we will be done. And it'll be under an hour. Look at that. Wakening and the capacity for seeing in darkness were anticipated, as if in a dream, and rendered visible in the firm outlines of the mythology of Athena's birth. She springs forth, i.e., a leap, a mutation. This Athena myth is the myth that signals the oncoming mental consciousness structure. She springs forth, i.e., a leap, a mutation, from the head of Zeus. She is the image of thought, of conscious thinking, capable of perceiving once unseen relationships as well as realities hidden by darkness. Athena is owl-eyed in her attribute. The owl sees in darkness and perceives night as day, and it was Athena which was destined to become the site of Western man's awakening to truly rational thought. Athenians whose voice determined our world and whose thought determined our notion of time, whose sagacity gave our mental perspectival world its shape and countenance. Socrates, Euclid, Plato, Aristotle. In his voiced determination, and in the very fact that we are justified in using a term reminiscent of the acoustic undercurrent of the magic mythical heritage, the completed transition from the magic world of the ear and hearing to the mythical world of the speaking mouth is evident, and the shape and countenance heralds an essential characteristic of perspectivity. It is a visual world. The mental world that's coming invokes the eye, and the eye needs clarity, and that's manifested in rational thought. We're trying to be very clear, as clear as we can possibly get. Think of the book, for example. Everything that belongs to us, with its connotations of the auditory, is an expression of our power or might. It belongs to the magic structure and is attuned to its unity, i.e., in accord with its nature. I'm going to repeat for emphasis. Everything that belongs to us, with the connotations of the auditory, is an expression of our power or might. So anything with the ear or power or might, that's magic. It belongs to the magic structure and is attuned to its unity, i.e., in accord with its nature. Everything that corresponds to or conforms with us is an expression of our psyche or soul and corresponds to the mythical structure. Everything we see is an expression of our understanding, and this seeing and conceptualizing are commensurate with the mental structure. And it would be well for us to be mindful of one actuality. Although the wound in the head of Zeus healed, it was once a wound. Every novel thought will tear open wounds. When recalling mythical man and his achievements, we must not forget the infinite pain and agony, even though, as the infinite may suggest, they may be only a rational grief or anguish in the soul. Everyone who is intent upon surviving, not only the earth but also life, with worth and dignity, in living rather than passively accepting life, must sooner or later pass through the agonies of emergent consciousness. So when mythical man made that transfer to the mental consciousness structure, there was a lot of problem. That always happens. Unfortunately, it's just part of it. There's pain and there's struggle and there's conflict. That has to happen. You can't just wake up on Tuesday, go to bed a mythical conscious structure, and then on Wednesday wake up a rational. It's just not going to happen. You have to earn it. You have to try. You have to put a effort into it. So, in sum, the mythical consciousness structure brings objects in the world into relation with each other through Polaristic, complementary, and corresponding. I guess you can call them binaries. Remember, think the yin and the yang. If it balances each other, it corresponds to one another, and it complements each other. Same thing. Good and evil, light and darkness, heaven and hell, man and woman, waking consciousness, dreaming consciousness. All of these were understood to be a part of a 2D flat circle, mid winter and summer, that complemented to each other, corresponded one another, and fell back in on each other. You simply could not have one without the other, and if you tried to remove one, you would remove both. There was no rationally reconciling good and evil. And when I use the word good and evil, it reminds me of Friedrich Nietzsche. What is Nietzsche doing? He is beyond good and evil being the two poles of how morality was sort of understood. Good necessitated evil, and evil necessitated good. They both fell in on each other. Nietzsche, using rationality rather than purely mythical thought, is deconstructing that. He's getting beyond good and evil. What imbues him with the confidence to get beyond good and evil? He has a new consciousness structure. He's adapted to a new consciousness structure. And this is what happens when new consciousness structures come up. They deconstruct the old ways of understanding the world. That's what I was talking about with time, severing and partitioning. Severs the old image of the world. So that's how it brought objects in the world in relation to each other. It was birthed from the discovery of the soul, which is the internal, if you insist on rational terms, the psyche. The soul is fundamentally, I guess you call it either irrational or pre-rational. It is symbolic, it is interpretive, it is qualitative, it is, in a word, everything the rationalists hate. And that brings us to the fucking rationalists. I say this as someone who is not a Christian. Let's take the Bible, for example. The Bible is mythology, people. Mythology, as I just explained in the past 46 minutes, and this is Joseph Campbell's phrase, mythology is psychology misread as biography. What does that mean? Mythology belongs to the mythical consciousness structure, which is the internal, the soul, the psyche. It is not supposed to be in a historical or scientific accounting for the world. It never was. And the fact that, I'll get there. Psychology misread as biography. Presupposed in biography is a certain rational thought. We are being accurate and realistic in our recording of the externalized spatial world. That is not what the mythology is about, as I just explained. So psychology misread as biography. The rational conscious structure, biography, is deconstructing the mythical conscious structure, psychology and mythology. And that is the problem with what's happening. Again, take the Bible. The Bible is mythology. There is nothing. When you go up to a Christian and you say, "Hey, did you know that the Earth isn't 5,000 years old like the Bible?" Yeah, dude, we know. We're well fucking aware. The fact that you guys walk around, and this is coming from someone who's not a Christian, with your little bow ties and your little fedoras, and you walking around like you've got it all figured out because you realize that the Earth is older than 5,000 years. Well done. Very well done. We're very proud of you. Soon you'll get a lunchbox and some cookies at the end of fucking kindergarten class. My God. To watch all the atheist, logic lord rationalists have a profound misunderstanding. A profound misunderstanding of what mythology is and what it means to be a human. And then to springboard off that profound misunderstanding and to deconstruct all the aspects that of the world and the human condition that have been built off the mythical consciousness structure, and to destroy everything, and then to walk around like, oh, we've done a really good job here. We're living in the age of reason now. I don't know if I can do it, boys. I need you guys to start arguing against rationalists because it's too much. It's too much. It just blows my mind. This is the problem with rationalism. Rationalism privileges what is quantifiably measurable and consciously known. The mythical conscious structure is the exact opposite of that. So it just simply does not deal with them. Images and symbols that arrive in myth and dreams and stuff like that, don't take them seriously. They deride myth as fairy tales that have no purpose. It's just a waste of time. It's a byproduct of an old irrational age that we're trying to shut the books on, and we just don't want to do anything with it. Any conception of what it means to be a man that is besides a Darwin, analytical, brutally cold, and logical understanding of our ontology, which is a fancy word for being, what it means to be something. Humans are more than just mere biological and economical units that are just meant to just sort of, I don't even know. I have no idea what even the point of living is in this world under the atheist rationalist conception. Is it just efficiency for economic gain? Is that what I'm really glad we're letting you guys run the culture. Um, no, myth is important. I will, just because the soul can't be neatly measured on your little chart, it doesn't mean I'm going to ignore it. And doesn't mean I'm not going to acknowledge its existence because you can't put it in your little logical proofs. If you insist on using the psyche, fine. But I'm going to make fun of you because you're the one walking around with blinders on and pretending you've got the whole thing. I'm the one who took the blinders off, and I'm like, oh, wow, there's a whole world out there. And you're just, no, 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 you idiot. No, it's just this house. It's just this. They're ridiculous. They're destructive. And they're just absurd. I don't know what else to say. I cannot stand the rationalists. Ironically, the next one is the mental structure. I already pre-recorded some rants against rationalism, so hopefully they're already out soon, or already out, or will be out soon. What else did I want to say? Is there anything else I wanted to rant about? Yeah, don't ever let these guys walk around saying, "Oh, well, it's not 5,000 years old," and this. Yeah, dude, we know, we're well aware. I'm glad you just came to terms with this like 3 seconds ago, that we all understood. It's nice to know you're here. And now, after burning the house down, you're sitting there like, oh, I don't have any place to live anymore. Yeah, that's what we've been telling you. This is the problem with rationalism. It takes apart from the whole and sectors apart from the whole and transposes the whole onto the part. It cannot account for the magical and mythical conscious structures. They're too irrational, not quantifiably measurable, not consciously known, too symbolic, too qualitative, too interpretive, and they just say, well, that either doesn't or shouldn't exist, and the only thing that should and does exist is that which can be considered true through dictates of rational thought, science, economics, evolution, math, all that crap. And in doing so, they have sectored a very small part of our world and the human condition, and they are simply pretending that it doesn't exist. But the problem is we actually do need myths, and I would argue that the destruction that we see in America right now, the absolute, I don't want to say absolute chaos, but the slide towards chaos, the slide towards increasing conflict. Yeah, we don't have any myths that bind us. This is important. There's 4 functions of myth. 1, um, cosmological purposes. That's to set the cosmos in order. Now, science has kind of taken over and done that, but nonetheless. 2, there has to be a mystic function. There has to be some sort of transcendental deities where you're hitting, it's beyond just the bare physical world that we see here. It's supernatural. 3, this is more important, individual purposes. Myth provides these symbols and images that carry the spirit forward. Rationalists cannot account for this. They don't even take the spirit seriously, and they think the images and the symbols are just neurons firing off when we're sleeping. It's embarrassing. So it's supposed to improve individual progression, and then, of course, we have the societal function. It binds the society. It engenders a moral compass. It assigns meaning. It tempers our aggressive aspects of us. And there's tons of benefits to religion and myth. Now, this isn't to say that religion is some answer to end all be all. There's a lot of irrationality and ridiculousness in religion. I'm not a Christian. There is a reason for it. Nonetheless, I'm not going to play the atheist game and pretend that, oh, no, yeah, we can actually build an awesome civilization where everyone gets along and everyone's peaceful and everyone's like a perpetual logic lord while working with 5% of what it means to be a human. And I guess the atheists are so rational and smart that they can't see that that's going to blow up in their face. So there you go. The rationalists don't understand mythology. They have a profound misunderstanding of it, and they have springboarded off that profound misunderstanding to ruin the world. They are rationalists. They are immoderated, rationality. They are the personification of rationality. I don't know if you've noticed, to be a human is to be more than just the faculty of rationality. There's all sorts of aspects to us that have been built directly off the mythical and magical conscious structures, and the rationalists, if they had it their way, they would say, no, we're not doing that. I don't want to be a full human being. I want to be I want to be the laws of logic personified, because that sounds like a really fulfilling and meaningful and I don't know, impressive way of viewing the world. And it's ironic that the rationalists do this because all these guys are transhumanist. And what that means is they want to exploit technological advancements that will in turn empower human beings and scale up our natural abilities to the point that to describe them as a human being would be inaccurate. don't have the powers of human beings. They have advanced powers, whether it's given by technology or not. Um, that's what they want. And the rationalists, the great irony about all of this is that the transhumanists who have decided that they're going to turn us all, or at least try to convince us to turn us all into little cyborgs, little robots, um, they've said being a human isn't good enough. I don't want to be a human. I want to be a cyborg. You're not a human. You've never been a human. You're just the personification of rationality. And the fact that you think you can springboard off that to try to turn us all into little cyborgs and put this death cult into the culture, absurd. Absurd. I will be rational. It will be balanced. And I will also be irrational. I will be symbolic. I will engage with myth, with art, with the internal and the external. I will not just separate myself off. But the transhumanists talk about rationalism, talk about the end point of rationalism. I guess it makes sense. This is the great irony. Some people will say, look, religion exists for all those reasons I mentioned, and two, it protects us from the real. It protects us from the negative effects of the real world. Early death, death by childbirth, natural disaster, famine, brutal genocide, rapes, rape of Nanking, stuff like that. Awful, the worst things you can imagine in this world. Religion is a way of protecting. That's one of the reasons why religion is important. They've just done the same thing. They've done the same thing. They've reduced human ontology down to this unbelievably Darwin, mathematical, scientific view. They've realized, either consciously or subconsciously, hey, this doesn't actually give me a real kick in the butt to actually do anything. They're all determinists. None of them have free will. None of them believe in God. They all believe that when you die, you die. And all morality is just feelings, and they don't like feelings, so they can't be measured. Science is the end all be all. Efficiency in the economy is everything. And here we are. They can't protect themselves from the real, so they've just simply replaced religion with technology. And then they have the balls to walk around as if they are just so beyond anyone who dares to belong to a religion. Meanwhile, they just do the exact same thing and they just redefine it. How do I know I'm not in a religion? Oh, because I verbally claim to not be in a religion. It holds the exact same functions and purposes and does the exact same thing, but I can't do that because in 2025 America, that would make me not seem cool in this little rationalist culture we live in. I refuse to play your game. I refuse to have your unbelievably dehumanizing and laughably wrong account for what I am as a human. I will not play your game. And that should be all. I wanted to get that out because I cannot stand rationalists. They are truly the death of our civilization. Now, think the rationalists would say, because they're either or thinkers, and we'll get that in the next thing. Well, are you just saying we should be irrational? They can't even conceive of irrationality. It is either or dualism. Either you are rational or you are irrational. This is why it's impossible to convince these people, hey, we can transcend this limited binary thinking. We don't have to run backwards. And they are right when they say things like human sacrifices and these sort of really cruel and torturous methods of torturing people. That's wrong. I don't want to go back to that. That's absurd. That's my point. I'm trying to integrate everything into a balanced whole. I'm not trying to toss off rationality entirely. I'm trying to reel it back in, combine it with a moderated irrationality, because that's what they were complaining about, immoderated irrationality, this sort of violent, what's it called? Voluntaristic, willful, just urging. I'm just acting on emotion. There's no sense of rationality at all. I don't want that either. I don't want to go back to that either. But you guys have created your own problem because you went the other way. So that should be it. Next video, we will be going over the mental consciousness structure, and I will be giving it its props. I talk a lot of shit about rationalism, and rightfully so, because it is the cancer destroying our civilization. Nonetheless, as I just said, it has to be balanced, and once balanced, everything can be okay. But we'll get there next video. Thank you guys for listening. I hope you guys learned something. Please understand what the mythical conscious structure is. Learn what has been built upon it, which we'll be going through for the rest of this book, and you will live like a full human, not just some personification of rationality. So thank you guys so much. I cannot wait to see you guys soon, and good luck with everything.